Welcome to our business track of the Data Science Salon YouTube channel. This presentation by Ryan McCabe, Senior Data Scientist at Spotify, talks about how his team at Spotify recently stopped thinking about messaging as a marketing activity and started thinking of it as a product. He explores their answer and offers up a high-level view of how they are building customer-centric push and email messaging from the perspective of a data scientist. Enjoy.
Great, so welcome. My name is Ryan McCabe, and as the intro said, I'm a senior data scientist at Spotify. And today we're going to be talking about automated content marketing messaging, which is like a long title for saying we're going to be talking about automating a bunch of push messages at Spotify. So great, this is a summary. We're just going to lay out the context of the problem and the main question that we asked, what we did, and why we believe it works. And then we're going to open up for some Q&A. So it's going to go pretty quick. So great. So if you read my kind of abstract of the presentation, you'll notice that this was taken out of there. In general, different companies value their ability to communicate with their customers. And unfortunately, for many customers, the feeling is not mutual. But for whatever reason, companies continue to communicate, and many customers continue to be annoyed. So this is just speaking to, how annoying a lot of messaging can be. We're talking emails from companies or a lot of push messages can be just not very useful, right? And the question that I asked when working with my team was what if we stopped thinking about messaging as a marketing activity and started to think of it as a product? And the key difference here is for a lot of marketing activities, like an ad, right? There's an idea that, well, we can try to make it fun to consume, but in the end, it's an advertisement. Usually the user is wanting to get to some other content, right? And we're interrupting that somehow. But the thing is with maybe content marketing messaging, that doesn't really need to be the case, right? We can think of it more as a product. Okay. So this is some context for the problem here. Message reach. Now, one difference when you think about how does push messaging happen in an app like Spotify? Well, if you're taking it from the marketing context, it's okay, there's a bunch of marketers, right? And they're going from this idea of a campaign. There's campaigns to run, essentially. So it turns out that when you have that kind of scenario, the same marketers end up targeting the same kind of users. And so you have this distribution of treatment to the user base where there's some users that get all the messages and most users get 0 messages. And that's that distribution to the right. The distribution to the left, the normal distribution, is kind of what you would imagine to be the case, right? Maybe you might expect 5 messages a month from Spotify or 10, right? And some people might get a little less than that, and some people might get a little more than that. But that would be in a more carefully designed treatment. Right. So one of the problems that we had when we first started working on this is that we found that targeting users for these individual campaigns creates a long tail distribution of notice for the user in the long run. And so it creates these 2 separate problems, right? Like I said, many get 0 notifications and some get many notifications, right? And if you think about Spotify, it's a different kind of application than, let's say, something with like a notification center, or like, let's say Uber, like you call a car, right? And a car comes and you get a notification. So it's not really triggered, right? We want to give content that the user likes. And so it's just like a different kind of use case. So as you can see, like we have this power law distribution, right? And it's easy to kind of fix that some users get too many notices. You can just put a cap. But it can be pretty hard to fix like that many users aren't getting any notifications at all, and they might expect that from the product. Right? And then here's a chart it's important to understand, right, of what a typical message treatment looks like, right? So here we have like on the y-axis a percentage point difference. You can see this as like we're measuring the treatment effect. And then on the x-axis, we're measuring days since the push, right? So on the days before the message, it's very neutral. The day of the message, there's an increase in activity in the treatment group. And then the days following the message, there's an actual substitution. And it's really important to kind of like understand the treatment function, right? And if you don't measure over time, like we have the luxury of doing at a company like Spotify, a lot of companies like cannot do that because they don't have the amount of users to just segment by time. But we do, and this is what a function of a push message looks like, a typical one. So a lot of times when you're sending like any kind of message to the user, you're substituting future activity, right? So you're getting some activity now instead of maybe some activity later. And this isn't really something that tends to be measured in a lot of like campaign type metrics, right? And campaign type metrics, you're looking at like how many people clicked on it, or like, I don't know, did they play the content that you sent them, right? But if you look at it more of a product, you're really interested in each individual dose, each individual message, and how that kind of compounds over time. And of course, these substitution effects. Great. So what's the treatment in marketing? Treatment is the campaign. And while that's not necessarily like wrong, the actual treatment effect for the user over time is very different, or can be very different, right? So here on the left is like a very good scenario, a hypothetical scenario of what this would look like if we took a bunch of those treatment effects that we saw and like, bunched them up together and put it over a timeline, right? This is assuming that all of the interventions that we have are positive. So you can see here, each dot would be a message sent, right? And some part of the population maybe clicks on it, enjoys the content we send, right? There's substitution, and then the next message is sent, etc. You can see the beauty of this picture is like the positive effects compound. Very similarly, right, the positive or the effects can compound, but they can compound negatively, right? So if you're in the mindset of like, we're doing a campaign and you have a couple of interventions, well, it looks quite positive, right? Even by the third intervention here on the right-hand side, it's like, this is great. So if you're only picking a point in time to measure the treatment effect, then it can be very bad for you, right? Great. So like, given all of this context, we did kind of in exploring the problem in general around automating all of these push messages and really making it a product is, well, first we need like a bunch of messages, right? So not every user is going to be eligible for every message at any given point in time. And part of the reason why we have that strange distribution of like notifications per user is that, well, a lot of users aren't super active all the time, right? So it's like there might not be really good things to recommend them at any given point in time. Right? So we want to have for every user a lot of message candidates. And then if you think about it, like a lot of messages you can't really send twice, right? A lot of like, let's say, feature education messages. You don't want to show the user like a cool feature over and over again. One cool feature that we send a message to and try to do it only once is like there's in your Spotify app on your mobile, you can go into the settings and click a little button called Data Saver. And what this does is basically like if you have a poor connection, let's say if you live in a country with poor connection, cellular network, well, you can sacrifice some streaming quality, some sound quality, which isn't really noticeable to the human ear. You have to have very good headphones and maybe in a quiet space and maybe understand the bit rates of different kinds of files. Well, this can sacrifice some of that music quality, but you actually get to stream it on your poor network. So this is an interesting feature, but once you know about it, you know about it, right? It's there. So we don't want to send messages like that more than once, right? Or sending the same kind of content more than once. So you can understand if the treatment is perpetual, well, we better have a bunch of messages, right? Okay. And then is to set a standard treatment. And why we said that we needed to do this is because, well, there's so many moving parts in a project like this, right? We have like the time dimension, we have the message selection,
the time is 4:15 p.m.
Sorry, that was my Alexa. So we have the time dimension, we have message selection, we have like the frequency of dosage, we have all sorts of parameters that we could optimize for, right? But what we really want to do is like get a standard treatment that is like pretty good for everyone before optimizing. Because with a product like push messaging, the response function for some users is going to be negative over the long term. And for some users, it's going to be positive. And this, coupled with having different kind of experiences, makes it super hard to iterate on. So like from a product perspective, you want to have like a very simple standard treatment and like really, really wait to optimize on that front. And when you optimize, kind of only optimize one of those parameters at a time. And maybe this part will handle the questions more, like which ones to optimize for. But I tend to say like optimize for things that are more independent from each other. If there's more questions on that, then we'll handle it in the Q&A. And then the third thing is just like make a rule for message selection, right? And then all you have to do is kind of test and measure over time, right? Pure joy. That's what you get after you do this simple recipe. So this is kind of what making a bunch of messages might look like. These are some concepts. I don't think maybe one or two of these are live now. And there's a bunch of features nowadays to make messages more delightful by having images in them, by having like reactions to them right in the notification center. And you can see how it can be actually something that a user might want and be like not as disturbing as like come into Spotify, right? Great. And then we set a standard treatment. And in practice, this means like maybe something around like 5 messages a month, right? But maybe some users get 6, and maybe some users get 4 because like one of the sends fails for the user that month, or there was like I don't know, some event that we wanted to market, right? So we sent an extra push in batch to like kind of everyone. So these things happen once in a while, but the idea is that it's more or less standardized. And then we created the rule for message selection. What we used here was just a multi-arm bandit, right? And if you're not familiar with this problem, it's just a reinforcement learning problem. So basically, what we did is we, for each message sent, we just kind of randomize and say, okay, 10% of these or whatever percent of these, call it epsilon, we're going to give a random message from the eligible message pool. Okay, and we're going to use that for feedback, right? And then for the other, let's say 90%, we're going to exploit and give the optimal message, right? The measured optimal in this case, the optimal ranking from what we learned in explore. And there's a kind of balance here, right? If you don't explore enough, you're going to have larger measurement error. And if you don't exploit enough, well, you're not going to be getting anything above random. And then kind of the next step after that is to add context to the model, right? So let's say we're about to send user Y a message, and instead of checking the typical reward on that message or on this list of messages for all users, we're just going to check it with like similar users to user Y. Right? And this is a pretty popular method, like all over the industry. I'm sure you'll hear a lot of talks mention this problem, or have heard talks that mention this problem in the last 5 years. Great. And then the rest is just test and measure over time. And not over time as in days since a given push, but I'm talking like half year, right, with the kind of treatment, and really checking for fatigue effects, right? Because if you're giving a treatment and for the first, couple months, there's a bit of a more positive effect because it's new, right? And it becomes negative over time. Well, if that treatment in like the real world setting is perpetual, then you're actually going to be creating more damage for the user in the long run and not even know about it. So it's like very, very important to test over a long period of time and measure over time and have that standardized treatment to like limit the complexity there. And even when you do roll out, like have a whole back group. So basically in 2 words, like why this approach works is compound interest, right? The effects here, the treatment effects, are compounding at each dose of the treatment, right? So this is a very, very like powerful product, and it's something that you don't really see in many other like consumer products, right? A lot of the features in Spotify and many other apps, these are like ops in like explicitly to the feature, right? If they're going to listen to Discover Weekly, like they open the app and decide to listen to Discover Weekly. If they're opted in for notifications, pretty much we can send them notifications until we annoy them and they turn them off, right? So we try really hard not to annoy them, because if we do annoy them, you'll get the function on the right instead of the function on the left. And the function on the right is very, very damaging, considering the treatment is continuous and happens until the user turns it off or like leaves the platform. So pretty much in conclusion, when you're thinking about these kind of special treatments, I think it's very, very useful if you have the scale to think about it through the product lens instead of as a marketing activity. Because essentially, as a marketing activity, you say, well, we're going to get some short-term gains, but it might annoy the user in the long term. But if you're doing that on your own platform, well, that's not very smart, right? So you can do better. And that's it. So we'll open up for Q&A. Thank you.
That was a presentation by Ryan McCabe, Senior Data Scientist at Spotify, who shared his findings on how his team at Spotify are building customer-centric push and email messaging from a data scientist perspective. If you enjoyed that, please make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel below.